Washington's got a top 10 transfer class.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports is Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're going to talk some 2026 recruiting. We're going to have decent amount on that this week, so everybody's got to stay tuned for that. Make sure you subscribe to do that. We're going to do our big boards, which is going to be really, really fun. Can't wait to do that. We're going to talk about utilizing the spring transfer portal period. We've gotten a whole bunch of questions about what that might look like, so we're going to dive into it a little bit because Lars, according to On3, this is the number 9 transfer portal class in the country, which is really interesting when you look at their rankings. There are 14 guys coming in, obviously, and only 2 of them are 4 stars in terms of their industry ranking, as you know, you and I have discussed ad nauseum. That's not always the biggest factor, but it's nice to see when Tacario Davis is one top 15 guy in the country. And then they also have Alex McLaughlin is their other 4-star transfer, just rated on their industry ranking or whatever it is. And you look up and down this class, this is a really, really nice just class for Washington in terms of what it needs for the Big Ten.
Absolutely. Well, I think the other side of that equation is there's enough quote-unquote 3 stars that they've had that could pop and be 4 stars. Johntay Cook, I'm sure, could be a 4-star in terms of production. CJ Christian might be a 4-star in terms of production. Buda Alukta could be another 4-star in terms of production. So you look at it and say, oh, wow, they got a bunch of 3-star transfers. Well, much like 3-star recruiting rankings, I mean, Vita Vea was, well, I guess the Vita doesn't count. Greg Gaines was a 3-star. And you look at some of those other guys that were real solid contributors in the program, but were only 3 stars. And so, again, narratives are basically what the star rankings are for. You know, we love our narratives. We love our agendas here. But on the whole, it's more like, okay, we know that they address the positions of need. Simone Pepa can play himself into a 4-star ranking. And really, the rankings don't matter as much as the production that you're getting. And I think when you look at across the board from offense and defense, where Washington got their production is exactly where they needed it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing where interesting little thing that I was doing some research, wrote about it over on Huskies Wire on Monday as we record this. And Buda Alukta is actually the lowest ranked addition in terms of Washington's 3 linebackers, where X-Ray Alexander is the highest. And then it's Jacob Manu in the middle, where I just think that's curious because I think Buda might end up being the guy that plays the most this season. When, you know, you and I talked a little bit about what might happen with Jacob Manu and what he told Scott Eklund about his plans to redshirt this season, just in terms of getting his knee healthy, different things like that. So that's something to monitor. I just think that part is interesting enough because I think that's the strongest addition that Washington has made is just the linebacker room as a whole, where I love everything that was done in the secondary. You mentioned CJ Christian, Alex McLaughlin, who I've been really high on, and Tacario Davis, who needs no introduction at this point in time. But the linebackers, it's just you lost the most there. In terms of you lost a 5th-year senior in Carson Bruner, a 6th-year senior in Alfonso Tupatala, and a freshman that was a honorable mention freshman All-American in Kamori House. So you lost a lot of good, solid production there, and you're gaining great production like in Jacob Manu and Buda Alukta, and somebody with the athleticism, the upside that you're looking for in X-Ray Alexander as well. But Lars, and I know you didn't do this on purpose, you talked about the defensive side of the ball. You look at the offense and you say Johntay Cook, but Carver Willis is somebody who should be at the forefront of this discussion as well, where the rankings have kind of changed a little bit on the On3 side of things, where this is why we don't buy into it, where everybody's got their own rankings that they'll do, their own evaluation, which is fine. We get it. But I look at Carver Willis and I say, as I have since he came to Washington, that's a top 5 tackle in the transfer portal. And with all due respect to Drew as a party, it's a very different, much more significant addition, in my opinion, because you can go look at somebody like Isaiah World that Oregon's bringing in, or like they did with the Johnny Cornelius. And that's always a nice addition when you have a whole bunch of experience at, you know, the G5 or FCS, whatever level it might be, before you make the jump to the FBS. But with Drew, somebody who had started a couple of games, and we like his upside, we like his potential and what he brings to the table. But with Carver, it's somebody who has played at a high level at a Power 4 school for multiple seasons and has proven it. And there's a reason that he was as sought after as he was. So getting a guy like that in is really just kind of the linchpin of all this. And it's something we're going to certainly talk about in the next segment a little bit more. But it's when you look at the offensive line and you say, hey, how are you going to protect DeMond Williams? Because that's the most important thing. That is far and away what we are going to be talking most about between now and spring practice is making sure DeMond Williams is well protected and he has time to get the ball to all these weapons they brought in for him. And Carver is exactly what you want in that regard.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think the intriguing part about Willis is, not that it matters whether he plays right or left, because I think he seems like a tackle where no matter what he can thrive, where we saw as a party try and go to the left side a couple of times this season, and it was like, just abandoned ship. So there's some guys who can make that transition easy, and that's why I'm like, okay, if he ends up being a starting left tackle and proves that he can do it, that's a good sign. And then that means you're probably having McCree and as a party, competing at right tackle for the starting spot on that side.
Sure.
But if it's okay, well, if you're gonna have him just a right tackle, well, then what does that do with the left tackle? So that's it's just intriguing in terms of how they end up going about it. Again, we both expect him to start at left tackle, just based on how things are going. But I also wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's not like Drew has a party locked down that right side either. So in terms of which side he starts on, it just might be a matter of semantics. And obviously the left tackle gets paid more and things like that. But I think just as importantly, Garen Hatchett, at least right now, is going to be just as vital, because I'm not saying they're the same level of player, but given that you have strengthened numbers on the exterior at your tackles, but you need some help in the interior. Garen's a guy who at least has done it center and guard, knows what he's doing, can come in, and it's not necessarily that he might be a bona fide, plug and play left guard or right guard starter, but he's a guy where we saw this season, you might need to have 20 snaps on one side and 20 snaps to right guard, 20 snaps to left guard, and, kind of bounce back and forth, maybe, help at center a little bit. And just having that veteran presence, like you said, with Willis, is just as important, because strength is in numbers, not just top end talent. Obviously, you needed to go get Carver Willis, a massive, bona fide star left tackle, right tackle. But you also need to kind of just have this strength in veteran numbers where you can say, hey, you know what? Let's say Pocky wins the job and maybe he's struggling a game. He's plugging Garrett for 20, 25 snaps. And that you don't have that fall off and say, okay, well, now we need to go to another freshman, or we need to go back and, go to the JUCO ranks. No slight there. But just knowing what you have in Garrett from his time in Washington and then Oklahoma, I think that is going to prove to be a lot more significant than people are giving it credit for.
So when you talk about strength in numbers, the one position that made me think of was one where we didn't see that all year this year. That's a tight end, where I'm really intrigued by the addition of Kade Eldridge, where it's nice to just have a big local projectable body that's got the athleticism, that's got all those ideal traits that you could talk about for a tight end ad nauseum, that just didn't really get developed because he played for Lincoln Riley and USC, where that's just not what they do. They don't use tight ends. That's why Deuce Robinson left. He was never really a tight end anyway, but he's going elsewhere. And I say all that with Kade Eldridge to say, you don't need him to be a big part of the rotation this season, but that's a guy who you really like, just for all the everydayers, all the Husky fans out there, that you're going to want to keep a close eye on, because he's somebody who, if he's like the tight end 3 this season, I wouldn't be surprised if he even might be tight end 4 behind Bear Naone. But that's a guy who down the road has everything you need, where once Quentin Moore kind of, moves on after this season, where I'm curious to see how they want to utilize him and if it's going to be in a similar role, because then there still might be a role for somebody like Kade Eldridge or Baron Naone, because Decker DeGraff, we know what he is. He's that move, that guy that you can place all over the formation, who's much better. I like him as a blocker, but is much better as a receiver. And as you continue to move forward, I think that Kade Eldridge is one of those guys that you can have him continue to grow as a blocking tight end and just really help solidify a room where the bodies, the numbers were just straight up not there last season. But Lars, that just kind of brings us to an interesting point, because I don't think that we're going to see a ton of movement in the spring portal period with Washington, but we're going to see a little. which we'll get to right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. Attending the new 12-team college football playoff games is an incredible experience that brings fans together like never before. I remember the excitement of past playoff games and can't wait to make new memories with the updated format and the extra teams involved. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets, which is great news for me personally because I love using Game Time during baseball season, and Game Time Picks will find great tickets for upcoming games. Browse through the deals is a breeze, and you can find great value for all kinds of seats around the venue. The super deal in particular stood out as the best value for the event. I love that I can see the seat views before buying, that the app shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees to check out, plus the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee gives me complete peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So Lars, as we kind of dive into the spring portal, we're looking way too far into the future here, but we want to make sure we talk about this because we've gotten a ton of questions saying, hey, the class, I feel XYZ about the class. I like it. I think there's more to do, whatever it might be, but what else is going to happen? So we've officially seen a whole bunch of guys transfer elsewhere. Justin Harrington's at West Virginia. Peyton Waters is at North Carolina. Jason Robinson Jr. is at North Carolina. Thaddeus Dixon, it appears he's looking elsewhere. We've got our eye on that one. But when you look at the spring transfer portal period class, I think we could still see 2, maybe 3 additions, depending on, who enters, what it looks like. But the most curious part of this, in my opinion at least, is the guys that are going to be leaving, because that's where, people are going to ask what you're going to do, but it doesn't matter if there aren't spots available.
Right. And I think that's the kind of interesting situation in Washington is in where you have to have attrition. You have to have more guys leave. Like there's not a if. It's not a, I wonder if we'll see some guys leave. It's no, you're going to have to get rid of some guys or, cut that freshman class by at least a third, which you're not going to do.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have some natural attrition. And I think the guys that you're looking to add in that spring period are probably going to be one offensive lineman, maybe one defensive lineman. And then, the rest is, might just be in terms of what position groups end up struggling early on in spring camp or things like that, where the coaching staff says, hey, maybe we should shore up this position one way or another. I don't think we're going to see any surprises. I think that's why, Peyton Waters going right now and not waiting until the spring ball and sort of stuff like that. Those are the ones where, those would be the ones where you would have expected, oh, wow, okay, maybe he would have stayed around in spring. But it's no. With the numbers and the way things are, you kind of just have to, take your lumps right now, and you're probably going to lose 2 or 3 more probably 2 more offensive linemen. I would say get a 2-for-1, a 2-for-1 swap in terms of number wise. You're going to have to go without naming names. You can just look at that room and say, well, there's at least one, and then maybe a second. So I'll give you that. Somebody's going to have to transfer out of that room to make room.
I don't know if it I agree that there might be one. I don't know about 2, but if you see one, it would be a 1-for-1 swap, or trying to get just maybe one guy in there with a little bit more experience on the interior in that Gear and Hatchet mold, where it's just a guy with 1 year remaining, because you can look at that room and you can say, look at all the guys they brought in. You brought in so much talent to that room, and we know what it's like when that room is shorthanded, because we've seen it and it looks bad. We saw it all year long. That was a shorthanded room with a bunch of younger guys that you weren't comfortable playing just yet, which was very obvious. So you want to make sure that you don't make that mistake again. I think that's the most important thing when it comes to the offensive line. And while there might be 1 or 2 guys that I'm sure people can look at and they're going to have their own opinion, saying, maybe this guy, I wasn't a fan of this or that, or I think that guy might be better suited developing at a lower level before coming back to Power 4, anything like that. Those are all certainly possibilities. I just don't think that this room has the ability to take too much attrition, just in terms of why would the coaching staff want that? And I just say that because we saw what a thin, just short-handed room looks like in that regard, where, and you and I like Pocky P now. We like a lot of these guys, but it was, hey, that's the next, the next option at this position is a true freshman. You don't want to be in that scenario. And I'm glad that's where you started the conversation, because you look at it and you say, there are a lot of people who still want, maybe another edge rusher, maybe another defensive tackle. That's where you might be able to do that because there aren't as many younger bodies in the room. Like you look at this class and there are 4 true freshmen, 2 on the interior, 2 on the edge. And I think you and I are, very safe to say that if there's a position that's going to redshirt, it's going to, for sure right now, it's going to be those defensive linemen. But yeah, it's just tough, man.
Well, the reason why I say that you're going to have to lose some of these guys, it's the same thing with the receivers, where we saw Jason Robinson and Keith Reynolds leave as 2, redshirt freshmen and freshmen respectively, or I guess vice versa in that situation. But the point being that you just look at all those young guys, you don't want to have more than a half of your depth chart be first or second year players. And if you look at it, you're bringing in 5 offensive linemen, right, in the 2025 class.
Yeah,
plus
4 now.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So 4, so that number becomes a little more logical. And then you look at it and say, okay, well, let's just run through, Jaquette, Boyajian, Hilkema, Sawane. You're looking at all these young guys, which is good, but you kind of want a little bit of gap in between because, in 26, you're then talking about, junior, redshirt, sophomore, redshirt, freshman. You can only have so much of that be backloaded with younger guys.
You're right, but at the same point, though, you want to just have as much depth as possible. It doesn't there is a point where it doesn't matter what what the eligibility is. You just want to make sure that you have quality bodies there, especially being in the Big Ten, because again, we saw what that just looks like. We just saw what that looks like when it's not up to par, when it's not where it needs to be, because Will Rogers was obliterated in the back half of the season. Damon Williams took 10 sacks against Oregon. What did Louisville have? 11, 12 tackles for loss. That's what it felt like in the Sun Bowl. That's what it is when the offensive line is not up to par and it's not where it needs to be. And we've seen them go out and address that. But and that's why I say, if you want to bring in one more guy, that's fine. But I think there are other places where you can find room to make cuts where it's like the Peyton Waters discussion. I'm glad you brought that name up because at safety, it's a little bit easier to stomach that, or you and I really like Peyton Waters. We talked about that being one of the biggest losses of just the portal period as a whole. But it was because you have 6 other true redshirt freshmen or sophomore safeties. That's what happens at the position where, you talk about wanting to space guys out where, yeah, it's nice to have, a little bit of disparity in terms of just the classes. But at the same point, the cream is going to rise to the top. And every once in a while, you're going to see a Peyton Waters leave the room. That's just what happens. That's just the world of college football that we live in. Some people don't want to accept that. That's fine. I get it. But that's just the reality of what it is now. And every once in a while, if somebody wants to go play somewhere else, they're guaranteed a starting spot somewhere else. Whatever. That's the way it's going to be. But if you have all the talent, like Washington is trying to do along the offensive line, because they brought in, and I hate that I keep using this term, but that's what it is, big projectable bodies. John Mills, Champ Talele, all the guys. You go through that offensive line class and you see a bunch of bodies that, okay, yeah, I understand why you brought this guy in, and he might need a year or two, but that's okay. That's what it is along the offensive line. And if you stock that like they are right now with a Carver Willis, with a Gear and Hatchet who can be a stopgap, and you have those younger guys at the same point, like a Pocky Finau or a Michael Watkins or a Zach Henning or a Landon Hatchet, that you say, Maximus McCree being another example, just that you say, hey, we have this guy for 2-3 years and we're comfortable with where he is now with another year in the strength program. We really, really believe that this guy can get us where we need to be. And I know we didn't plan on spending this much time along the offensive line, but it's the best example for the position, just for the roster as a whole, because that's where you need to make sure that there is young talent. And you look at some of the positions where, corner is another good example. And at corner, we saw, hey, there is a lot of depth, and eventually somebody's going to have to lead this room. Eventually that's going to happen. We saw maybe a little more there than we might have expected, but bringing in Tacario Davis certainly offsets that for the time being. And that's kind of where it is, where you can bring in a stopgap. Well, Dylan Robinson might not need to play as much as you and I expected he might. Or, you can push Leroy Bryant, Caleb Presley, whoever it is, into a bigger role at the same point in time.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously the latter is gonna certainly be the case. And I just wonder when it comes to the offensive line, like there's certain positions like I'm glad you mentioned quarterback and safety because I feel like you can do that with certain skill positions like that. Whereas, doing it on the defensive and offensive line, it's a little bit trickier, because, you can push them. I mean, we saw this past season with Sawani and Kade Eldridge, where like they had good times, but also bad times. And they're both redshirt freshmen making their first starts. And, throughout the season as they went on, they got more experience, but it still was like, ooh, okay, And I think that's why I always caution people say, hey, well, you're going to go improve the offensive line, by signing these guys. It's like, yeah, but 3 or 4 of those guys ain't playing, more than 4 games next year. And so at some point, it's like, how do you, kind of moneyball it to fix both at the same time?
But it's not even a moneyball thing. It's that position as a whole just requires more patience, which is the biggest thing, where you're barely ever going to find somebody who is Caden Proctor. Like, that's the best example that I can possibly give at this point in time, who is, hey, yeah, this guy's a 5-star right now. He's going to start at Alabama straight out of high school. Like, that's the kind of talent you're doing. You were just not going to find that. So, and that's why, it kind of turned into the way that it is, where we sort of lost the plot of the spring transfer portal period. But at the same point, I don't think we did, because it's just saying, hey, this is the position that everybody wants to see improvement on. And that's 100% fair. We said that a couple minutes ago. But at the same point, it's also going to require a little bit of patience to get to where it needs to be. So to just put a bow on this, if you don't see a whole bunch of additions come spring, number one, what's the scholarship count? Keep that just keep a very, very close eye on that. Because if we see 2 or 3, because that's where the scholarships are, cool. We'll talk about that when the time comes. But if you don't, keep this discussion in mind, because this coaching staff is more than comfortable with letting a couple of these guys develop and just seeing the situation through, which is just very different from this season where you didn't really have that option. But Lars, we talked a little bit about recruiting, what that looks like, in 2025 in a couple different areas. Let's talk about 2026, because Brady Smigel is one of the biggest keys to this entire class, which we'll get to right after a message from our friends over at Wayfair. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC. I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get back into a routine. Whether you're tidying up, clearing out, or just want to give your space a new look to start the year, Wayfair has everything you need, all within your budget. I'm currently looking for a nice new couch, and their huge selection makes it easy to find pieces that fit my style and budget. My favorite part, the free and hassle-free delivery. Even for the larger items, Wayfair's site is so easy to navigate, and I found everything I needed in no time. There's something for every style and every home, no matter your space or your budget. Got to go check out everything you got, and you can do that and give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. So Lars, let's talk about this 2026 class, because there are a lot of really interesting pieces. And like I said, just a little hint to all the everydayers out there. As you listen to this on Tuesday, make sure you subscribe, hit that button, come back for our Wednesday show, because if you haven't dove into the 2026 class, there are a lot of really, really fun names that Washington is involved with it. You and I, Lars, we really want to dive in and say, hey, these are some names that you should keep a very, very close eye on. And number one is Florida State quarterback Brady Smigel. He is ranked as a 5-star on Rivals, 4-star on 247, everything like that. Still committed to Florida State, but Washington has made no secret that they're making a big push to secure his services.
And it's an interesting situation that Jimmy Doherty, Jedd Fisch, and this coaching staff is in, because you need to go, and this is where quarterback is kind of the enigma of all positions, because you need to go and chase a quarterback every year. You can't just say, hey, we're going to rest on our laurels. We took Daspy early, interesting Kade McLaughlin. 2 very good quarterbacks in their own right.
Absolutely.
25. DeMond, by the time Brady Smigel we get on campus, would be a junior, somewhere in that ballpark. My point being at that, and the reason why I bring this all up is because you need to go make sure you're chasing that high-end talent at least every other year, if not every year, at the quarterback position. And that's just the way it's going to be. You might not always get them, and we've seen them offer a couple of other 26 quarterbacks in the past couple of weeks as the coaches have been out recruiting. But without question, Brady Smigel is the number one guy that Jimmy Doherty and Jedd Fisch want. And it's not similar to DeMond because they're two different types of quarterbacks, which is what I think worth noting. But when it seems like whenever Jedd identifies a quarterback early on, where he did it with Noah Fafita at Arizona, and then DeMond was going to be the next guy at Arizona, and now you see Dash Brearley was the guy at Washington, and Jedd has an idea of quarterbacks, and he knows what he's looking for. And I think he actually talked about it during signing there, where he's like, each year, you kind of got to, play to the quarterback strengths. I'm not just looking for a 5'10", Kyler Murray looking guy. I'm not looking for a 6'6" Ryan Mallett looking guy. It's it kind of has evolved over time.
That name brings up too many bad memories, man.
I just had to. My point is I had to slide that one in there. That was the antithesis of those two other quarterbacks.
That's fair.
Peyton Manning or Tom Brady, because those two names also get overused, and I'm sure Bill Belichick will be using that in Chapel Hill now. But with that being said, I think Jedd and Jimmy, I think, clearly like what Brady can do. He's a good downfield passer, a guy that you're getting a California guy, because I know he's out of Newbury Park, right? And,
yep, that's right.
So you're getting a guy we'll call it Southern California, and you're looking at it and thinking if every other year you can get a top 50, top 35, player in the class that happens to be a quarterback, you're doing pretty good as a program.
So that's one part of it, is just the year in, year out, hey, we're attracting top quarterbacks, which is a good draw when you have Jedd Fisch and you have Jimmy Doherty who working with him, and we've seen what they were able to do with DeMond. We saw what they were able to do at Arizona with Noah Fafita. But on top of that, it's that magnet, right? Where you look at what Arizona's 24 class was, and it wasn't the highest in terms of the rankings, but we've seen that DeMond was that magnet. You talk to guys in the 25 class, like Raiden Vinesbrae is a big example, and it's guys wanted to play with DeMond. Like, that's what it is he is the glue that is tied, that has just kind of held all of this together, which is part of it. But the other part of it is, let's see what you're able to do with that in 26, where Brady is somebody who's shown he could be a big time playmaker in Southern California. And I'm so impressed with this film, man. The arm talent, the added mobility. And this is, Lars, keep in mind, this is already a top 20 class, and it's very early in the cycle. I know that. We're recording this on January 13th. Nobody needs to remind me what day it is when I talk about this, but it's always nice to see, that Washington is building a really strong 26 class really early on in the cycle, with Isun Tafa as the headliner right now on the offensive line, and Susanoe, a guy that you and I are both really high on, and then some really talented local guys like Terrence Sarian and Wasi Lalobi. Like, this is a really, really good class so far. But you need to add to it, and a quarterback is always just the draw. That's what it's always going to be. And that's what it was with DeMond. And you look at Brady, and you get a guy like that, and then all of a sudden, some of these guys that I'm really excited to talk about, like Brandon Arrington or at Jet Washington, some of the top wide receivers on the West Coast, maybe all of a sudden they're giving you a closer look. Or some of these top offensive linemen like Tommy Tofi or Sam Utu, who are guys that Washington should be looking very, very closely at. Or some of these other defenders that say, hey, I've had to go against this guy on the 7-on-7 cycle. Maybe, we've played each other at some point in time. All of a sudden, they're giving Washington a closer look because they know what kind of player Brady Smigel is. And that's why that's another reason that getting a top quarterback is so important in every single class. But Lars, you talk about just saying, hey, it was Dash in 25. It looks like they want it to be Brady in 26. It's just stacking talent at every position where, I say this with all due respect to Dash because I'm a huge fan of his game, but going from DeMond to Dash right now is not it's a bit of a concern just because he's a true freshman. But next season, all of a sudden you have a junior DeMond Williams, a redshirt freshman or a sophomore Dash Brearley, who we know this coaching staff is really high on. And then all of a sudden behind them, it's, now they've got borderline top 50 player in the class and Brady Smigel waiting in the wings. And then 27, you keep it going with somebody else like that. And you just have that pipeline, that system at quarterback, especially in the Big Ten where quarterback has been really weak. People are going to notice that. And you're going to be able to recruit at the high level that Jedd Fisch has said time in and time out how much he wants to do, and that always starts at quarterback.
I agree, although I think it's kind of intriguing because I'm glad you mentioned Ensign Tafa. Go get a 4-star bona fide tackle in the class and say, hey, because if I'm Brady Smigel, it's like, great, I can get developed as a quarterback. I could look at UNC and USC and Lincoln Riley and say that. But am I going to get protected? Am I going to actually have the talent around me that I need? And I think that's the important piece. So now you're seeing, like mentioned, Tafa commits, Sarian commits. You already had Sanoe. And so you're starting to look and say, okay, now I can start to, envision myself more as a Husky, whereas you looked at back when he committed to Florida State, I want to say in June or July.
June, yeah, that's right.
It was, okay, well, you got DeMond coming in as the freshman, 2 more quarterbacks. And it's like, yeah, but, I think, guys aren't really worried about competing. And look at Louisville. Like, Louisville lost a couple of quarterbacks. And so your quarterbacks are just going to be the one that end up transferring. Like, that's a position where I look, and I'm not saying DeMond, but I'm just saying, like, you're looking at saying, hey, look, if your backups want to transfer, you can't blame them because there's only so many starting jobs to go around, and only so many guys want to be a QB2 so they can be a QB1 the following year. And that's why you're looking at Smigiel thinking, okay, by the time I get on campus, most of that will be sorted out, and I'm not going to start as a freshman. I won't need to, but just like DeMond did. But I can be involved. I can have some packages. I can get my feet wet so that by the time I go into my second season, I'm fully there, ready to go, versus having to kind of just get thrown into the fire with no experience.
But it's the one thing that you said I think is really important to highlight before we get out of here. It's always going to be under much more of a microscope because it is the quarterback position. But if you have the appropriate talent stacked at the position and you feel comfortable about where it is, it feels a lot easier to lose a guy to transfer because they want to go start somewhere else. Or if it's, hey, yeah, we've got 4 scholarship quarterbacks that we're really confident in, and obviously, like DeMond Williams, that's what it is right now. DeMond is the starter, but we've got 3 guys who we're like, if any of them needed to take the field right now, we're very comfortable in that scenario. If that's the case and one guy decides to go elsewhere, it's still a loss and it still sucks, but it all of a sudden isn't nearly as significant because you're stacking talent in the way some of the top teams around the country do, which is what Jedd has made it imperatively clear that that's what he wants to do moving forward. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to everybody who's tuning in. We really do appreciate the support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So wherever you get this podcast, please make sure you subscribe, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click the little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.